Number 1. Stacey Castor. She sat beside her daughter's hospital bed, sobbing for the cameras, telling detectives she would die for her children, while the poison she had used to kill 2 husbands was already sitting in her own home, waiting for a 3rd victim. That 3rd victim was going to be her own daughter. Stacey Ruth Castor was born on the 24th of July, 1967, in Clay, New York, a quiet town near Syracuse. To her neighbors in Weedsport, she looked like nothing more than an overworked mother of 2 who had suffered terrible luck in love. 2 husbands, dead. But luck had nothing to do with it. Her first husband was Michael Wallace, a man she married in the early 1990s. In the year 2000, Wallace died suddenly. His death was ruled a heart attack, and Stacey buried him without a second look from investigators. She soon remarried, this time to David Castor, the owner of an air conditioning and heating company, where she worked as his office manager. On the 22nd of August, 2005, Stacey called the Onondaga County Sheriff's Office in a panic. She said her husband David had locked himself in their bedroom after an argument, and hadn't been seen or heard from in more than a day. She told deputies she believed he was depressed. When a sergeant kicked open the bedroom door for a wellness check, he found David Castor dead. Beside his body sat a container of antifreeze and a glass half full of a bright green liquid. As officers processed the scene, witnesses say Stacey screamed, "He's not dead! He's not dead!" The county coroner initially ruled it a suicide, a man in despair, drinking a lethal dose of ethylene glycol, the toxic chemical found in antifreeze. It's a horrific way to die. It starts like drunkenness, then curdles into kidney failure, organ collapse, and excruciating pain over many hours. But something didn't sit right with Detective Dominic Spinelli of the Onondaga County Sheriff's Department. David's ex-wife insisted he would never take his own life. David's own sister said the same. And investigators discovered something else troubling. David Castor had left his entire estate to Stacey and her 2 daughters. His own son received nothing. Spinelli kept digging. When forensic teams tested the glass found near David's body, they found Stacey's fingerprints gripped from the bottom, as if someone had been holding it up to his mouth. In the trash, they found a kitchen turkey baster, laced with both antifreeze and David's DNA. And then Spinelli remembered something. Stacey Castor had buried 2 husbands. He reached out to authorities in neighboring Cayuga County to look again at the death of Michael Wallace, dead 5 years earlier of an alleged heart attack. In September of 2007, investigators exhumed Wallace's body. The medical examiner would later say his organs were loaded with crystals, the telltale sign of ethylene glycol poisoning. Wallace had been murdered too, using the very same method as David Castor. As the walls closed in around her, Stacey Castor didn't run. She turned to the one person closest to her, her own daughter, Ashley Wallace, the very same daughter she had once cared for as a single mother after Michael Wallace's death. On Ashley's first day of college, investigators had shown up to tell her that her father had been poisoned. Distraught, Ashley called her mother. According to prosecutors, Stacey invited her over for a drink, the best friend ritual they always shared. The following day she offered Ashley a foul-tasting cocktail. Over the next 17 hours, Stacey slipped her daughter's sleeping pills and vodka by the spoonful. Ashley was found comatose in her bed by her younger sister. Investigators discovered a 750-word suicide note, supposedly written and left behind by Ashley, confessing to murdering both her father and stepfather. But the note contained a fatal error. The word antifreeze was spelled anti-free. Investigators had heard Stacey Castor make that exact same slip of the tongue during an earlier interview. Stacey Castor's trial began in January of 2009. She took the stand and denied everything, insisting, "I did not kill Michael Wallace, I did not kill David Castor, and I did not try to kill my daughter, period." The jury didn't believe her. On the 5th of February 2009, she was found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of David Castor, and of attempted murder in the poisoning of her own daughter. The presiding judge, Joseph Fahey, told her, "In my 34 years in the criminal justice system, as a lawyer and a judge, I have seen serial killers, contract killers, killers of every variety and stripe. But I have to say, Mrs. Castor, you are in a class all by yourself." She was sentenced to 51 years to life in prison. The press quickly dubbed her the Black Widow and the Antifreeze Killer, a name she would carry for the rest of her life, which ended behind bars on the 11th of June 2016, when she was found dead in her cell of a heart attack. If you're just settling in for tonight's cases, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling us which case shocked you the most, and give this video a like before we move on. It genuinely helps this channel, Midnight Cold Case, keep bringing you cases like this one. Number 2. Lynn Turner. She fed her dying boyfriend a bowl of Jell-O, then a plate of grilled cheese, and by morning, he was dead on his couch. The second man she had killed the exact same way, with the exact same poison, for the exact same reason. Julia Lynn Turner, known simply as Lynn, was born Julia Lynn Womack on the 13th of July, 1968. Adopted as an infant, she grew up in a turbulent household in Georgia, eventually working as a 911 dispatcher for Cobb County. In 1991, she met and began pursuing a Cobb County police officer named Maurice Glenn Turner. They married in August of 1992. The marriage soured quickly. Lynn spent more than Glenn could earn, and the couple drifted into separate bedrooms. Around the same time, Lynn began an affair with a Forsyth County firefighter named Randy Thompson. Glenn remained unaware of the affair, and by 1995, he had quietly begun planning to move out and file for divorce. He never got the chance. On the 2nd of March, 1995, Glenn Turner went to the emergency room complaining of flu-like symptoms. He was treated, released, and sent home feeling better. The next day, Lynn came home to find him dead. His death was ruled a heart attack. Just 4 days after burying her husband, Lynn Turner moved in with Randy Thompson, the boyfriend nobody in his family even knew existed, since they believed Lynn was either divorced or a widow, not a woman who was still married when she began dating him. She soon collected close to $250,000 in insurance proceeds and death benefits from Glenn's policies and pension. Lynn and Randy went on to have 2 children together, though the couple never married. Randy eventually became a firefighter himself, but like Glenn before him, his relationship with Lynn deteriorated, and in 1999, he moved out telling friends it was for his sanity. On the 22nd of January 2001, Randy Thompson was found dead in his apartment. The night before, he had told a friend he'd eaten a grilled cheese sandwich and some tea that Lynn had brought him for lunch. He'd already been sick, but said he was feeling better. Hours later, that same friend called to check on him and found him breathing hard, vomiting, and dizzy. The next day, firefighters broke down his door. He was found dead on his couch. His official cause of death, just like Glenn Turner's 5 years earlier, was ruled an irregular heartbeat. Lynn only received $36,000 from his death. His $200,000 policy had lapsed before he died. It was Glenn Turner's own mother who cracked the case open. Reading Randy Thompson's obituary, she noticed the eerie parallels to her own son's death, and picked up the phone to call a relative of Thompson's. The two families began comparing notes. The same flu-like illness, the same sudden collapse, the same woman standing beside both deathbeds. In May of 2001, the Cobb County District Attorney reopened the investigation into Glenn Turner's death. A medical examiner ordered new toxicology tests on Thompson's remains. They found ethylene glycol, antifreeze, poisoning. Because Glenn Turner had died under such similar circumstances years earlier, the examiner ordered his body exhumed too. The results were identical. Both men had been fed antifreeze, likely hidden in sweet foods like green Jell-O, which masks its sickly sweet taste. Investigators also discovered that Lynn Turner had once called an animal shelter to ask about the effects of ethylene glycol poisoning in pets. The same poison notorious for killing curious dogs and cats who lap it up off garage floors. Lynn Turner went on trial for Glenn's murder in 2004, and a Houston County jury convicted her. 10 months after Randy Thompson's death, she had already been arrested for Glenn's murder, and now she faced a second trial, this time for Thompson's death, in March of 2007. Prosecutors sought the death penalty. The jury found her guilty of malice murder after just a matter of days, but ultimately spared her life, sentencing her instead to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On the 30th of August, 2010, Lynn Turner was found unresponsive in her cell at Metro State Prison in Atlanta. An autopsy revealed she had ingested a massive overdose of propranolol, a blood pressure medication she had been prescribed. Her death was ruled a suicide. The woman who had poisoned 2 men to death met her own end the same way she had ended theirs, quietly and by her own hand. Number 3. Barbara Steger. She told police her husband kept a loaded gun under his pillow and that it simply went off while she was moving it in her sleep. Nobody thought to ask her the same question twice, until someone remembered that her first husband had died in an eerily identical accident a decade earlier. Barbara Steger was born Barbara Terry in Durham, North Carolina, on the 30th of October, 1948. She married young to a man named James Larry Ford, known as Larry. The couple had 2 sons and settled in High Point, North Carolina. After 9 years of marriage, Larry Ford died in what was ruled an accidental shooting. Barbara later remarried, this time to Allison Russell Steger III, known to everyone as Russ, a well-liked high school baseball coach. As the years passed, the couple fell into financial trouble, adopting a stricter, lower-budget lifestyle that, according to those who knew her, cramped Barbara's taste for spending. Investigators would later reveal that Barbara had been secretly borrowing large sums of money, forging Russ's signature on loan applications, and even on the title of a vehicle, all without his knowledge. At 6:08 in the morning, on the 1st of February 1988, Durham police received a phone call from Barbara Steger. She said she had accidentally shot her husband. Russ, she explained, kept a loaded handgun tucked beneath his pillow for protection, and it discharged when she reached under it while half asleep, startled by what she believed was an intruder. Russ was rushed to the hospital, alive but gravely wounded from a gunshot to the back of his head. He died hours later. At first, police believed her. The case was nearly closed as an accident, until Russ's first wife, a woman named Jolynn Snow, came forward with information that changed everything. Jolynn told detectives that Barbara's own first husband, Larry Ford, had died under nearly identical circumstances a decade before. She also revealed something even more damning. Russ Steger, in the months before his death, had grown suspicious of his wife and secretly recorded himself asking questions on tape, including one haunting line. Why, if he'd been asleep at 4:30 in the morning, would Barbara have woken him up to give him sleeping pills? Detectives reopened the case. Digging into Barbara's finances, they discovered that within just 4 days of Russ's death, she had already filed his will at the local courthouse. A will that left her the couple's $120,000 home, 3 cars, and full access to his bank accounts. She was also the sole beneficiary of Russ's life insurance policy, worth more than $160,000, according to investigators, with court documents later putting the total insurance proceeds she stood to collect above $164,000. Barbara Steger went on trial for first-degree murder in 1989. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding her guilty. She was sentenced to death, with an execution date set for just 2 months later. But the North Carolina Supreme Court later voided her death sentence over a legal technicality involving how the jury had been instructed to weigh mitigating evidence. At her resentencing in 1993, Barbara was given life in prison instead, which under the laws in place at the time still allowed for the possibility of parole. Barbara Steger has been denied parole multiple times, including as recently as 2018, and remains incarcerated at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. Her case became the subject of the true crime book, Before He Wakes, by journalist Jerry Bledsoe, which was later adapted into a television movie of the same name. Number 4. Ruth Snyder. She persuaded her husband to sign a life insurance policy worth nearly $100,000. Tried to kill him 7 separate times, and when he finally died, she staged a burglary so clumsy that a detective needed only a single glance to know she was lying. A case so infamous, it inspired one of the most iconic crime novels of the 20th century. Mae Ruth Brown was born on the 27th of March, 1895. In 1915, at the age of 20, she met a 33-year-old art editor named Albert Snyder in New York City. Despite little in common, she was vivacious and outgoing. He was quiet and reserved. The two married and settled into a modest home in Queens Village. In 1918, they welcomed a daughter, Lorraine. The marriage was never a happy one. Albert kept a photograph of a former fiancée, a woman named Jessie Gishard, who had died years before Ruth ever met him, hanging on the wall of their home, and had even named his boat after her. In 1925, Ruth began an affair with a traveling corset salesman named Henry Judd Gray. The two met secretly at hotels. They kept a suitcase permanently ready at the Waldorf Astoria, and their affair soon escalated into something far darker. Ruth first convinced Albert to purchase life insurance. With help from an insurance agent who was later fired and imprisoned for forgery, she secured a policy worth $48,000, carrying a double indemnity clause, meaning it would pay out twice that amount if Albert died from an unexpected violent cause. Combined with 2 other policies, Albert's total coverage would have paid out $96,000 upon his death. According to Gray's later testimony, Ruth made at least 7 separate attempts on her husband's life before the final, fatal night. Using gas, sleeping pills, and poison, none of which succeeded. On the 20th of March 1927, following a night of drinking, Ruth and Gray finally killed Albert Snyder as he slept. They beat him with a heavy sash weight, stuffed his nose with chloroform-soaked rags, and strangled him with picture frame wire. Afterward, they ransacked the house, hoping to make it look like the work of a burglar who had stumbled into a robbery gone wrong. It didn't work. Ruth claimed she had been attacked and knocked unconscious by 2 intruders, but a doctor who examined her found no evidence of any blow to her head. Detectives noted that her feet had been tied, but not her hands. The jewelry she claimed had been stolen was later discovered hidden under her own mattress. The murder weapon itself, the sash weight, turned up in the basement. When a police inspector told her plainly that the crime scene didn't look like a real robbery, Ruth reportedly asked how he could possibly tell. He answered simply, "We see lots of burglaries. They are not done this way." Under questioning, Ruth eventually named Gray as her accomplice. Gray, found later in Syracuse, folded quickly and confessed, but the two immediately turned on each other, each insisting the other was the true mastermind and killer. Their joint trial became a national media sensation, nicknamed the Dumbbell Murder by columnist Damon Runyon for what he considered its remarkably stupid execution. Journalists, celebrities, and curious spectators packed the Long Island City courtroom every single day. Both Ruth Snyder and Henry Judd Gray were convicted and sentenced to death. On the 12th of January, 1928, Ruth Snyder was executed by electric chair at Sing Sing Prison, becoming the first woman executed there since 1899. Unbeknownst to prison officials, a Chicago Tribune photographer named Tom Howard had smuggled in a tiny hidden camera strapped to his ankle, capturing the only known photograph of her execution at the exact moment the current passed through her body. It ran on the front page of the New York Daily News the next morning, and remains one of the most infamous news photographs in American history. Gray was executed shortly after her, the same night. Ruth Snyder's crime, a wife, a lover, and a life insurance scheme gone catastrophically wrong, would go on to directly inspire the novel and film Double Indemnity, cementing her case as one of the true architects of the modern American true crime genre. If cases like this keep you up at night in the best way, make sure you're subscribed to Midnight Cold Case and drop a like right now. We've got 6 more cases still to go. Number 5. Uloma Curry Walker. She told her firefighter husband she had stage 4 breast cancer to convince him to marry her, and less than 4 months after their wedding, he was ambushed and shot to death in his own driveway, gunned down in a murder-for-hire plot she had personally paid for, all so she could collect a life insurance policy that in the end never even belonged to her. Uloma Curry, later known as Uloma Curry Walker, was in a long-term relationship with William Walker, a beloved lieutenant with the Cleveland Fire Department. According to those close to them, Curry told Walker she had been diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer and could not afford the treatment she needed. Moved by her situation, Walker proposed, believing that marrying her would allow her to access his health insurance benefits. The two married in a private courthouse ceremony in Cleveland, Ohio, and soon after bought a home together in the suburb of Madison, hoping for a fresh start away from the city. But behind the scenes, Curry Walker was buried in debt, tens of thousands of dollars of it, some run up fraudulently in her husband's own name, and prosecutors say she feared he was close to discovering it. She told her 17-year-old daughter and her daughter's boyfriend, a young man named Chad Paget, that she wanted her husband dead, and that once he was gone she would collect $100,000 from his life insurance policy. On the evening of the 3rd of November 2013, William Walker was returning home from picking up fast food that his wife had specifically requested. As he walked toward the house, a man named Ryan Doherty, who had been hired through a chain of connections starting with Paget and continuing through his cousin Christopher Hine, ambushed him and shot him 4 times. Walker was rushed to Metro Health Medical Center, where he died that night. Neighbors reported hearing gunshots and screaming. Cleveland police initially chased a different theory, following leads that neighborhood drug dealers may have targeted Walker to silence his complaints against them, leads that, investigators later realized, Curry Walker herself had planted. The case went cold for more than a year, until a Crime Stoppers tip and cell phone records finally connected the dots between Paget, Hine, and Doherty, and back to Curry Walker herself. Here is the twist that made the case almost darkly ironic. William Walker had never gotten around to updating the beneficiary on his life insurance policy after marrying Curry Walker. When the $100,000 payout was finally issued, it went not to his new wife, but to his ex-wife, Rita, the woman still listed as the beneficiary of record. The entire murder plot, meticulously planned and violently carried out, ended up profiting Uloma Curry Walker nothing at all. Investigators also discovered that Curry Walker had never actually been diagnosed with cancer. There was no medical record of chemotherapy, no evidence of treatment of any kind. The disease she claimed had driven her husband to marry her appears to have been fabricated entirely, possibly to rush him into a wedding before he could learn the truth about her mounting debts. All 4 of her co-conspirators eventually pleaded guilty and testified against her at trial. Curry Walker's own daughter testified that her mother had proposed the murder plot while the 2 of them were riding in a car together, and recalled her mother saying, "No one would believe I would hire a bunch of kids to kill someone when I know people that could." In a written confession she gave the day she surrendered to police, Curry Walker instead claimed she'd had her husband killed because he was abusive, a claim her own defense team could not support with a single witness at trial. In 2017, following a 10-day trial in Cuyahoga County, a jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding Uloma Curry Walker guilty on all counts, including aggravated murder and conspiracy. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 18 years to 28 years to life. Her daughter, who was a minor at the time of the murder, received 1 month in juvenile detention as part of a plea agreement. Number 6. Marguerite Bork. She served her husband a drink laced with a sweet, odorless poison at his own mother's house. And when he collapsed the next morning and was rushed to the hospital, she stood by, knowing exactly what she had done, and exactly how much his death was worth to her. Marguerite Bork lived in Ava, New York, married to a 50-year-old mail carrier named Terrence Bork. On the 19th of September 2005, while the couple was visiting Terrence's mother's house, Marguerite laced a drink with antifreeze, a substance well known among poisoners for one grim reason. It is sweet-tasting and virtually odorless, easy to disguise in food or beverages. The next morning, Terrence was rushed to the hospital. He died shortly after. At trial, prosecutors laid out a chilling motive. They said Marguerite had discovered her husband was having an affair with a friend of hers and was planning to leave her. Rather than face a divorce, prosecutors argued, she chose to kill him and collect on his life insurance policy instead. Testimony also revealed that Terrence Bork had suffered a strikingly similar bout of poisoning symptoms roughly 6 months before his death. Hospitalized with dizzy spells, headaches, and unexplained pain throughout his body, and that Marguerite had encouraged him to drink a certain liquid around that same time. Insurance company employees testified during the trial that Marguerite had already withdrawn roughly $100,000 from her husband's death benefits within a year of his passing, and that she stood to eventually collect as much as $342,000 in total. Her defense attorney argued that Terrence, depressed over his declining physical health, may have taken his own life by drinking the antifreeze voluntarily. Suicide is certainly a very real possibility in this case, he told the jury. The jury didn't buy it. In March of 2007, after deliberating for less than 3 hours, they convicted Marguerite Bork of second-degree murder. At her sentencing that May, 63-year-old Bork continued to maintain her innocence, telling the court, "I loved him with all my heart. I don't know what happened. I don't know how. If I had to at gunpoint, I would drink it myself before hurting another human being." The judge sentenced her to 25 years to life in prison. Her case, emerging from the very same corner of New York State, and involving the very same method of poisoning as Stacey Castor's crimes, drew comparisons in the press to a disturbing pattern. Antifreeze murders committed by wives seeking insurance payouts, cropping up again and again across the country in the very same era. Number 7. Dixie and Dyson. While her husband lay bleeding to death on the floor of their own home, stabbed repeatedly by a man she had hired to kill him, Dixie Dyson had sex with the killer, an act she had planned in advance, to leave behind physical evidence to support the story she was about to tell police, that she had been the victim of a random, violent home invasion. Dixie Ann Dyson lived in Huntington Harbor, California, married to a man named Mel Dyson. According to investigators with the Huntington Beach Police Department, Dixie had endured a difficult life before meeting and marrying Mel. But rather than seeking a divorce when the marriage soured, she instead began plotting his murder with a lover named Enrico Vasquez and a second accomplice, Ira Lamb. The plan called for Mel to be killed while he slept, and for Dixie to collect approximately $135,000 from his life insurance policy. On the night of the murder, Mel Dyson was stabbed to death inside their home. Dixie later told police that a masked robber had broken in, killed her husband, and then raped her before forcing her to drive him away from the scene. Detectives with the Huntington Beach Police Department were skeptical almost immediately. Dixie had conveniently been sleeping in a separate room that night. There was no blood found on her body or in her car, and she had waited several hours after the supposed attack before ever calling police. As lead investigator Dale Mason later put it, violent crimes like this one typically aren't random. There is almost always a relationship between the victim and the person responsible. Investigators pieced together forensic evidence from the crime scene, blood patterns, a fingerprint left inside the trunk of the couple's car from an earlier and seemingly unrelated break-in, and DNA collected from the supposed rapist. That evidence eventually led detectives to Enrico Vasquez and Ira Lamb. Meanwhile, Dixie was attempting to collect on Mel's $100,000 life insurance policy. But the insurance company, aware of the ongoing homicide investigation, refused to pay out while the case remained open. It was that very insurance payout that investigators used to lure Dixie back into their reach. When Vasquez initially evaded capture, famously leaping out of a window and fleeing to New York City after police showed up at his door over an unrelated stolen ring, investigators let word filter back that the insurance company was finally ready to release the six-figure payment. Dixie booked a flight home. The moment she landed, she was arrested. In December of 1986, roughly 2 years after the murder, Dixie Ann Dyson was taken into custody. Facing the weight of the evidence against her, Dixie agreed to cooperate with prosecutors and testify against her co-conspirators. With her help, Vasquez was convicted of murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and Lamb was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. Both received sentences of 25 years to life in prison. In exchange for her cooperation, Dixie Dyson's own conviction was reduced from first-degree murder to second-degree murder. In 1988, an Orange County jury delivered its verdict, and Dixie Dyson was ultimately sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Number 8. Blanche Taylor Moore. She fed her dying boyfriend arsenic-laced pudding, spoonful by spoonful, in his hospital bed, while doctors just down the hallway held on to toxicology results that could have saved his life, results that never made it into his chart in time. Blanche Taylor Moore was born Blanche Kaiser on the 17th of February, 1933, in Concord, North Carolina. She would go on to become one of the most infamous women ever tried in the American South, a soft-spoken, devout, grandmotherly figure whom absolutely nobody suspected of poisoning the men in her life, one after another, for decades. In 1952, at just 19 years old, Blanche married a Korean War veteran named James Napoleon Taylor. 2 years later, she began working as a cashier at a Kroger grocery store, eventually rising to head cashier, the highest position a woman could hold at the company at that time. In 1962, she began an affair with the store's manager, a man named Raymond Reed. In 1973, her husband James Taylor died of what was recorded at the time as a heart attack. Blanche and Raymond Reed then began dating publicly, and their relationship continued for well over a decade. By 1985, that relationship too had soured, and Blanche had moved on to a new man, a regional Kroger manager. When that affair ended badly, she filed a sexual harassment lawsuit against both him and the company, which Kroger eventually settled out of court for $275,000. It was around this same time that Blanche met Reverend Dwight Moore, the newly divorced pastor of a small church in rural Alamance County. The two began meeting for meals, even as Blanche continued secretly seeing Raymond Reed. In 1986, Reed developed what doctors first diagnosed as shingles. He was hospitalized in April of that year, and his condition steadily worsened. He died on the 7th of October, 1986, with his cause of death recorded as Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that, as it happens, closely mimics the symptoms of arsenic poisoning. Blanche and Dwight Moore married in April of 1989. Just 5 days after their wedding, Dwight became violently ill after eating food she had prepared for him. He was hospitalized repeatedly over the following months, spending 3 harrowing weeks in critical condition. Doctors eventually ran toxicology tests and discovered arsenic levels in his body roughly 100 times the normal amount, enough, by many measures, to be considered a lethal dose. Dwight survived, but only barely. The hospital notified the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. During questioning, Dwight recalled that a former boyfriend of Blanche's had also died of Guillain-Barré syndrome, the very same rare condition that had claimed Raymond Reed. Investigators also discovered that Blanche had attempted to have herself made the principal beneficiary of Dwight's pension. That discovery triggered exhumations of 3 bodies: Raymond Reed, James Taylor, and Blanche's own father. Toxicology results on all three came back showing elevated, and in 2 cases, fatal, levels of arsenic. It also came to light that during Reed's original 1986 hospitalization, doctors at Baptist Hospital had actually ordered a toxicology screen that would have revealed arsenic poisoning while he was still alive. But the resident physician overseeing his case rotated out to another hospital before the results came back, and the findings were never passed along the chain of command in time. Reed received his final fatal doses of arsenic while lying in that same hospital bed, undiagnosed. On the 18th of July, 1989, Blanche Taylor Moore was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the deaths of both Raymond Reed and James Taylor, along with assault with a deadly weapon for the near-fatal poisoning of Dwight Moore. Her trial for Reed's murder opened in Winston-Salem on the 21st of October, 1990. 53 witnesses testified against her, directly contradicting her repeated claims that she had never brought Raymond Reed food during his hospital stay. On the 14th of November, 1990, Blanche Taylor Moore was found guilty of first-degree murder. During the sentencing phase, the jury found that she had committed the murder for financial gain, and that the killing had been especially heinous and cruel. 3 days later, the jury recommended the death penalty, and on the 18th of January, 1991, the presiding judge formally sentenced her to death by lethal injection. The charges related to James Taylor's murder and the assault on Dwight Moore were ultimately dropped once her death sentence for Reed's killing was secured. Blanche Taylor Moore went on to become the oldest woman on North Carolina's death row, where her case remains one of the most chilling arsenic poisoning cases in American criminal history. We're halfway through tonight's list. If you've made it this far, that's exactly the kind of dedication we love here at Midnight Cold Case. So smash that like button, leave a comment with your theory on what makes these women so hard to catch, and make sure you're subscribed before we continue. Number 9. Nannie Doss. She giggled while confessing to poisoning 4 husbands, 2 with her own children, 2 grandchildren, her own mother, her sister, and a mother-in-law. And every single time detectives asked her why, she smiled and told them she was only searching for the perfect romance. Nannie Doss was born Nancy Hazel on the 4th of November, 1905, in Blue Mountain, Alabama, into a poor farming family. Her childhood was harsh. Her father was controlling and abusive, and he refused to let his children attend school, keeping them home instead to work the family farm. Nannie's one escape was reading her mother's romance magazines, dreaming of the perfect love story she believed was waiting for her out in the world. At age 7, she suffered a serious head injury during a train ride, an incident she would later claim caused years of blackouts, headaches, and depression. At 16 years old, Nannie married her first husband, a co-worker named Charles Braggs. The couple had 4 daughters between 1923 and 1927. In 1927, 2 of their middle daughters died suddenly, suspected at the time to be food poisoning. Braggs, reportedly terrified of his wife, soon fled with their oldest daughter, leaving Nannie with their youngest, a girl named Florine. In 1929, Nannie married her second husband, Robert Franklin Harrelson, an alcoholic with a criminal record for assault. The marriage lasted 16 years, marked by his drinking and, according to Nannie, an assault against her in 1945. The very next day, she laced his jar of corn whiskey with rat poison. He died that evening. Around this same period, 2 of Nannie's grandchildren also died suddenly and suspiciously under her care. One, an infant, allegedly stabbed in the head with a hat pin while Nannie was watching the baby. The other, a young boy, found dead from asphyxiation for reasons that were never adequately explained at the time. Nannie married a 3rd time to a man named Arlie Lanning in North Carolina. Lanning, too, struggled with alcohol. In early 1952, Nannie began slipping arsenic-laced rat poison into his food. He died on the 16th of February 1952, with his death initially attributed to heart failure amid a local flu outbreak and his own drinking habits. No autopsy was performed. Shortly afterward, the couple's house burned down, and the insurance money went straight to Nannie. Not long after, Lanning's own mother died suddenly in her sleep. Nannie soon left North Carolina, moving in with her bedridden sister Dovie, who died mysteriously not long after Nannie's arrival. Undeterred, Nannie turned to a dating service called the Diamond Circle Club, and in 1952, met and married her fourth husband, Richard Morton. Morton wasn't an alcoholic, but according to Nannie, he was unfaithful. Before poisoning him, she poisoned her own mother, who had come to live with the couple, in January of 1953. Morton died 3 months later, on the 19th of May 1953. About a month after Morton's death, Nannie married her fifth and final husband, Samuel Doss, a devout Christian minister in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who strongly disapproved of the romance novels his new wife loved so dearly. In September of 1954, Samuel was hospitalized with flu-like symptoms, diagnosed at the time as a severe digestive tract infection. He was treated and released on the 5th of October. On the 12th of October 1954, Nannie poisoned him one final time in what she would later describe as a rush to collect on 2 separate life insurance policies she had taken out on him. He died that same evening. His sudden death alerted his own doctor, who ordered an autopsy. The results revealed an enormous amount of arsenic in his system, enough, according to reports at the time, to have killed a horse. Nannie Doss was arrested almost immediately. Over the following days of interrogation, she confessed to killing 4 of her 5 husbands, along with her mother, her sister, a grandson, and a mother-in-law. 11 victims in total, spanning nearly 3 decades. Throughout her confession, she reportedly giggled and joked, earning her the nicknames the Giggling Granny, the Lonely Hearts Killer, and the Jolly Black Widow. When asked directly about her motives, Nannie insisted that money was never truly the point, that she had simply been chasing the perfect love story she had dreamed of since childhood, and that each husband in his own way had failed to live up to that fantasy. But investigators were clear that insurance payouts followed nearly every one of her killings, providing her with a steady stream of financial security each time she buried another spouse or relative. The state of Oklahoma chose to prosecute her only for the murder of Samuel Doss. On the 17th of May, 1955, Nannie Doss pled guilty and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Due to her gender, prosecutors did not pursue the death penalty, even for a woman who had confessed to so many deaths. She served roughly 10 years before dying of leukemia in 1965, at the age of 59, taking the full truth of every death she caused to her grave. Number 10. Betty Neumar. 5 husbands, 5 deaths, and for 22 years, one man kept calling the police, begging them to reopen the investigation into his brother's murder, a case everyone else had already given up on. Betty Neumar was born Betty LaFawn Johnson in November of 1931 in Ironton, Ohio, the daughter of a coal miner. Over the following decades, she would marry 5 times, and every single one of those marriages would end with her husband dead. Her first husband was Clarence Malone, whom she married in 1950 and divorced by 1952. Nearly 2 decades later, on the 27th of November, 1970, Malone was found shot dead outside his automobile repair shop near Cleveland, Ohio, killed execution style with a single bullet to the back of the head. Because the couple had been divorced for 18 years by that point, Betty was never seriously considered a suspect, and the case was never solved. Her second husband, James Flynn, died in the mid-1950s. Betty told investigators he had frozen to death in a truck in New York City, though she reportedly told others a different story, that he had been shot on a pier. Very little verifiable information about Flynn's life or death has ever surfaced, and no evidence has ever directly connected Betty to his death. Her third husband was Richard Sills, a man she met while working as a beautician in Jacksonville, Florida, during his time serving in the Navy. On the 18th of April, 1967, police found his body in the bedroom of the couple's mobile home in Big Compton Key, Florida. Betty claimed the two had been alone, arguing, when Sills pulled out a gun and shot himself. Investigators at the time accepted her account. In 1968, Betty married her fourth husband, Harold Gentry, a retired Army soldier. By July of 1986, the couple was living in Norwood, North Carolina. That month, someone fired 6 bullets into Harold Gentry inside his own home. Betty claimed she was out of town at the time of the shooting. The killer was never identified, and once again, Betty collected on her husband's life insurance policy, this one worth $20,000. What almost nobody knew at the time was that Harold's own brother, Al Gentry, had never accepted the official story. For 22 years, Al repeatedly pushed North Carolina authorities to reinvestigate his brother's death, insisting Betty was responsible. A former police officer named Alan Lawrence would later come forward with an even more damning account. He claimed that in the weeks before Harold Gentry's murder, Betty had approached him, along with 2 of her neighbors, asking them to kill her husband for her. None of them agreed to do it, but somebody eventually did. Betty went on to marry a 5th and final husband, John Neumar, in 1991, after moving to Augusta, Georgia. At the time of their marriage, John was reportedly worth more than $300,000, though the couple would later file for bankruptcy in the year 2000, buried under more than $200,000 in debt spread across 43 separate credit cards. John Neumar died in 2007 at the age of 79, with his death attributed to sepsis, a blood infection whose symptoms can closely resemble arsenic poisoning. His own children later said they were never informed of their father's death, only learning about it after stumbling across his obituary in the newspaper, and discovering that Betty had already had him cremated, despite the fact that he had purchased a burial plot years earlier. That final suspicious cremation was ultimately what reopened the entire case. In May of 2008, North Carolina authorities charged Betty Neumar, now 76 years old, with 3 counts of solicitation to commit first-degree murder in connection with Harold Gentry's death, alleging she had tried to hire multiple people to kill him for his $20,000 life insurance policy. Following her arrest, investigators in Georgia, Ohio, and Florida all reopened their own long-closed cases, examining the deaths of her other husbands with fresh eyes. Georgia authorities even seized and tested John Neumar's ashes for traces of arsenic. The results came back negative. The investigations into her earlier husbands ultimately produced no new charges. The press, seizing on her extraordinary pattern of dead husbands, dubbed Betty Neumar the Black Widow. She was released on a $300,000 bond in late 2008 and continued to await trial for years, professing her innocence in a 2009 BBC documentary titled Black Widow Granny. But Betty Neumar would never face a jury. On the 13th of June, 2011, she died of cancer at a hospital in Louisiana, before her case could ever go to trial. Upon hearing the news, Al Gentry, the brother-in-law who had spent more than 2 decades demanding justice for his brother, said simply, "She took all those secrets to the grave." 5 husbands, 5 deaths, and to this day, not a single one of them has ever officially been solved. That's all 10 cases for tonight. If any of these stories stayed with you, let us know in the comments which one you think was the most calculated. Hit the like button and subscribe to Midnight Cold Case so you don't miss the next deep dive into the darkest corners of true crime history.